we had a look at the short run, and we said that in the short run, a firm that's trying to increase its output faces problems. And then the reason is that in the short run, there's a fixed factor of production. And therefore, to expand, you have to combine more and more of the variable factor, like labour, with units of the fixed factor. And therefore, that fixed factor gets overused. Workers run out of machines to use, and so on and so forth. Well, the long run is different, because in the long run, what we can say is that all factors of production are variable. We can change the total amount of all of our factors of production. We can have more land, more labour, more capital. And what that means is that the problem that we saw in the short run, which was if that's output of stuff and that's your cost, we said in the short run what starts to happen is that your average and marginal costs, once output gets beyond a certain point, your average and marginal costs start to rise. In the long run, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, because instead of more and more workers having overusing space or overusing tools or something, now we can give them more space and more tools. And the question is, well, what happens if we were to double all of our factors of production? And one possibility is that what's going to happen is that your unit costs will go down. In other words, what we're going to have is what's called internal economies of scale. So in other words, a firm that is twice as big, that expands all of its own factors of production, a firm that gets twice as big actually has lower costs. So what happens is that so this is the short run average cost curve that's drawn for a particular size. It's a firm with a certain amount of floor space. Suppose that's a firm with 100 metres squared of floor space. Well, perhaps it expands, doubles its size. Well, what might now happen is that actually instead of costs staying the same or going up, what happens is that its unit costs go down. And maybe if it gets even bigger, then costs can fall again, like that. It's a SRAC3. So what we end up with then is that, if a firm is facing internal economies of scale, what happens is that its long run average cost, which is just made up of all the short run, so the long run average cost falls continually. So we end up with a series of short run average costs like that, SRAC1, SRAC2, and so on, and they combine to make the firm's long run average cost, which kind of goes like that. So that's a firm with continual economies of scale. So why might it get those economies of scale? Why might it be the case that a firm that's twice as big has unit costs that are lower? Well, there's kind of a standard set, So the ones that students always like are bulk buying, that we can get discounts from our suppliers, that type of stuff. Other sorts of things are physical economies of scale, and that's linked to the idea of what's sometimes called returns to scale, where if you double all your inputs, your output more than doubles, and that's things like area-volume relationships. So if you double the surface area of a ship, you more than double the volume that's within it. There are financial economies of scale. So banks, because you've got more assets, banks are more likely to lend to you. There are managerial economies. You don't need twice as many managers in order to run a larger firm. Therefore, the cost per unit goes down. So those are your internal economies of scale. But of course, it's equally possible that what could happen is that as the firm expands, actually it becomes much more difficult to manage. So what we've been saying is up to a certain point, our short run average cost curves were going down like that. But actually there is a danger that, particularly with multinationals, where you've got to operate across lots of different time zones and operate with lots of different languages, or just with more people, that what starts to happen is that your short run average costs start to get pushed up. So instead of this continually falling short run average cost curve, where one falls after the next, we end up with that. So then we end up with a situation whereby the firm initially has internal economies of scale, but after a bit it has what are called internal diseconomies of scale. And these can come about for a variety of reasons. You can't use standard textbook ones with problems with communication. It's harder for people to ensure that things are, that the messages get through quickly, and that therefore the organisation can respond in a timely fashion. If it doesn't, then that wastes time and money. Problems with coordination. getting resources in the right place at the right time to avoid wasting time and inefficiencies. It can be problems with control, making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it can be problems with motivation. That it's very easy in large organisations simply to feel like you're a small cog in a giant machine. So that's, in the long run then, it's possible that average costs might go up, it's possible that average costs might go down. Really, it depends on how well you manage it. Most organisations, most research suggests that the diseconomies of scale are easily possible to avoid through effective management techniques. It's certainly a possibility, but in the long run, if you're well run, then it should be possible to avoid them. The other type of economies of scale that you need to know something about are what are called external economies of scale. And these are slightly misleading in terms of their name, because it's nothing to do with the scale of the firm. The scale refers to the scale of the industry. So are you a firm in a very big industry, or are you a firm in a very small industry? Suppose then that the industry expands. So you stay the same, but more and more firms join your industry. The question is, what happens to your average cost? So the firm is exactly the same size as it was before, but what happens to its production costs? And there are two possibilities, as you might imagine. They might go up or they might go down. So let's suppose that that's the long run average cost curve for existing firms. Let's suppose that's firm 1, which is a small firm, firm 2, a medium-sized firm, and firm 3, which is a big firm. Well, one possibility is that as the industry gets bigger, what happens is that workers start to build up skills themselves. They do university courses. So this might be true of something like the IT industry or something, where kind of 50 years ago nobody had degrees in computer science. Now everybody does, and therefore it's easier and cheaper for firms to recruit the workers that they need. Or perhaps specialist suppliers start to set up, providing you, which means that instead of you having to make all your own components, somebody makes them for you, at a lower unit cost. On that basis, you would have external economies of scale. And the whole, whether you're a small firm or a medium-sized firm or a big firm, you benefit from the expanded size of the industry. And as we say, that's things like, a pool of skilled labour might establish itself. Or it could be something, like specialist suppliers. On the other hand, it's obviously possible, that what's going to happen is that we get increased, the other possibility is that we get increased competition for resources, that type of stuff. So what could happen is that, take the banking system in London, you could argue that there's growing competition for workers. So competition for labour, and what that does is it leads to an increase in wages, or competition for land leads to an increase in rent. And on that basis, what could happen is that instead of falling longer average costs get pushed up. So these on the left, these are external economies of scale, whereas the ones on the right, they are, these ones are external diseconomies of scale. So just be clear, that internal economies and diseconomies, they are to do with an expansion in the size of the business itself. They might happen, they might not. It depends on how well managed the firm is, essentially. It depends on the nature of that business. So it's more likely you're going to get internal economies of scale in manufacturing, where there's lots of processes and so on. External isn't to do with the size of the business, it's to do with how large the industry is overall.